Morning. It is early May at the Wentworth Conservation Area in Amherst, Massachusetts. My name is David Peake-Jones. To my right is Mike Locher, and behind the camera is Marilyn Castriotti. We are here to do a virtual bird walk over to Mike to introduce the first of several species that we'll be looking at this morning to give you a sense of what birds are here at this time of year in these types of habitats. First bird we'll talk about today is called a green heron. The herons are a worldwide group of birds. They're all characterized by having very long spear-shaped bills and typically very long legs. They're wading birds, and the green heron in particular is an ambush predator. Unlike a number of its other family members, it will wait quietly on a branch, as you see in this picture here, for a small amphibian or more likely a fish to swim by, and it will snatch them up. Green herons typically like habitats more or less like this. If there were a little bit more marshy brush along the edges, then that would be ideal habitat. They'll also look for streams. So areas like this need to be conserved in order to preserve our green heron habitat. Green herons are relatively small herons. They've got this rufous breast and a back that doesn't really look green in most light. It tends to look dark blue or even brownish. Very dark heron, very small, and right now we are going to hear the beautiful call. If you were standing on the northern side of the pond here at Wentworth Farm in early May, you might encounter this species. This is the tree swallow. It's quite a well-known bird. It is one of a handful of swallow species that we can reasonably expect to find in Massachusetts. Swallows are small birds. They're only about 5¼ inches long. What distinguishes the tree swallow from other species, first of all, is what everybody notices: this gorgeous iridescent metallic blue back. The bird also has these rather long dark wings that are folded back against the body when at rest, and conspicuously it has a pure white throat, breast, and belly. The American tree swallow. How does this bird make a living? Tree swallows are built like tiny fighter planes. They are extremely sleek and aerodynamic. If the bird had its wings spread, you would notice that whilst they are rather broad for such a small bird, they are very pointed and rather back-swept. Those are adaptations for extreme maneuverability. The tree swallow, like all swallows, makes a living off insects in the air. You will see on a typical May morning in a location like this, you will see tree swallows quartering endlessly across the fields and wet areas, catching insects on the wing. And for that, they need a high level of maneuverability, and that's the reason for the body design. Tree swallows are quite a migratory species. They are only here in the summer. They winter far to the south of us, and in the very early spring, they start moving northward, generally arriving in this part of the world in mid to late March. The breeding of tree swallows, like most swallows, they are nest cavity dwellers. Their natural breeding would occur in a hole in a tree, usually a dead tree that is in an open area or in a flooded area. But they take very, very nicely to swallow boxes. And you can see, if we pan just briefly to the right, a swallow box that is not in use. There's one behind us that is actually actively in use, and we might get some footage of that in a moment. As far as tree swallow conservation status, Officially, this bird is regarded of low conservation concern at the moment. They are quite abundant and do fairly well across the nation as a whole. But a word of caution, birds that rely on catching insects in the air are vulnerable to what scientists are now recognizing as a worldwide major decline in insects in general. Both the diversity and biomass of insects is declining dramatically, so any bird that makes a living off insects is of concern at this time. And so let's take a listen to the tree swallow.
The next bird we'll talk about is the wood duck. Ducks are a worldwide group of birds. You find them almost everywhere. Ducks are characterized by having a relatively broad, flat bill and webbed feet. They're smaller than geese and swans and some other water birds of this type. This particular duck is one of the more beautiful ducks in the entire world. The male wood duck, bright red-orange eye. It's got greens, it's got reds, it's got blues. It's a phenomenal bird. And although the female to its right looks a lot drabber, there's an iridescence to her feathers as well that makes her a gorgeous species. Wood ducks are somewhat unique among ducks in that they have claws on their feet. This enables them to actually nest in trees. Most ducks will nest on the ground, in a marshy area, on a tuft of grass. Wood ducks nest in cavities in trees. This makes wood ducks vulnerable to two different kinds of danger. One is when areas like this pond get filled in or marshy areas are taken over. And the second is when large old growth trees that have the cavities large enough for a duck are taken down. Wood ducks, like almost all of the dabblers, these are called dabblers, they tend to stay in the shallows. They don't dive very often, although wood ducks are capable of it. These dabblers feed on a variety of things. Much of their diet is vegetarian. In some places, wood ducks will swallow whole acorns from red oaks, but they also eat invertebrates. Wood ducks were hunted to the brink of extinction back in the late 1800s and early 1900s. It had at one point been perhaps the most prevalent duck in the United States. However, they made a remarkable comeback. Now it is thought that they probably rival mallards as far as being the most common duck in the United States. And again, habitats like this, particularly wooded marshes and swamps, are ideal habitats for a wood duck. Again, I get a bird that doesn't have a very impressive sound. This is the wood duck.
Now standing at the forest edge here at Wentworth Farm, and if you were in this location or if you were taking a walk through the woods, you might encounter one of the many woodpeckers that live in this region. This is the red-bellied woodpecker. Let's talk first about what makes a woodpecker a woodpecker. They all tend to have certain characteristics in common. As most of us know, they make a living more or less by drilling into trees for various reasons. They will look for food in that way, and they will also excavate nesting hollows. Like most woodpeckers, the red-bellied has feet that are adapted for clinging to trees. It has extremely long, strong toes with very sharp claws on them to enable it to get purchase on a tree trunk. It is also modified in the tail end. It has specially modified tail feathers that are both longer and stronger than typical tail feathers, and the bird, as this one is doing, can actually prop itself against the trunk of a tree using these modified tail feathers. The business end of the bird, the bill, as you can see, in all woodpeckers tends to be quite long and powerful. It's built for drilling into trees. This bird has its tongue slightly extended. Woodpeckers all have tongues that are extremely long. They can extend several inches beyond the bill in some cases, and they tend to be equipped with both small barbs and also with a naturally sticky substance that enables them to extract food from holes in trees. So what makes this a red-bellied woodpecker? It is rather interesting. This is one of quite a number of birds that are inaptly named. If we could see the belly of this bird, it might have a faint pink reddish wash to it, but you would not automatically react to, oh, that's a red belly. The belly is basically whitish. Instead, the characteristics that people use to identify a red-bellied woodpecker are this beautiful black and white reticulated back. It's the only one of our local warbler, only one of our local woodpeckers that has quite this pattern on the back. And we also have this red color on the head. A lot of woodpeckers, for some reason, have red somewhere on the head. In the red-bellied woodpecker, the red starts right at the base of the bill, includes the entire crown and the back of the head, and goes down to the nape. I would call it a red cowl, and if I were to name this bird, I would call it the red-cowled woodpecker, but that wasn't my choice. Red-bellied woodpecker is not a particularly migratory species. This bird tends to stay with us year-round. You can hear it in the middle of the winter and throughout the warmer months. What is interesting about red-bellied woodpecker is that its range has changed quite dramatically over the last few decades. If you were birding in this area 20-25 years ago, you would have been very surprised to encounter this bird. As things stand today, this bird is extremely well established in New England, and it's quite a common part of the bird fauna in conservation areas like this, but it's also well adapted to human habitats. It will live in suburbs, it will live in yards, it will live in parks. We are, however, still at the very northern edge of the range of red-bellied woodpecker. If you travel north into New Hampshire and Vermont, you very rapidly find these guys petering out. But it is a bird that will likely continue to expand its range northward as time progresses. So let's hear some of the tones of the red-bellied woodpecker. This is the drum. And there is the distinctive chirr of the red-bellied woodpecker.
The next bird we're going to talk about is a member of the thrush group. And thrushes are among the most common birds in this part of North America. The American robin, which is in everybody's yard, is a thrush, as well as the eastern bluebird. But this particular bird is the wood thrush. The wood thrush needs large tracts of deciduous forest in order to breed successfully. Wood thrushes, like all thrushes, have a fairly long bill, and they're very, very comfortable with their long legs walking along the ground or hopping along the ground. Like most thrushes, the wood thrush spends most of its time down on the ground. It can eat a variety of things. During the summer, it probably concentrates mostly on insects, but it's also capable of eating berries. As it moves into the winter, berries become more and more important in its diet. The wood thrush is a species of concern right now. Because humans have continued to cut down forests or to segment forests, the brown-headed cowbird, which is a nest parasite, has much more access to wood thrush nests. And it's estimated that somewhere between 40 and 50% of all wood thrush nests have a brown-headed cowbird chick in them. And these brown-headed cowbird chicks will kill or outcompete the smaller wood thrushes. Wood thrush, unlike the green heron or the wood duck, have a gorgeous song. If you're walking in the deep woods and you hear a fluty song, very ethereal, that contains the distinctive phrase "iole," you're probably listening to a wood thrush.
Right, so once again, we're still at the forest edge here at Wentworth Farm, but we are also on the edge of a grassy field, which makes this a great place to talk about another woodpecker species that is found in this region, the northern flicker. As you can see immediately, this bird has a lot of the hallmarks of the woodpeckers in general. It has this powerful, sharp bill, which absolutely is capable of drilling holes in trees for various reasons. If we could see the feet of this bird, they are classic woodpecker feet, long, strong toes for gripping tree trunks, and modified tail feathers for propping itself into a tree. What makes a northern flicker a northern flicker? It is quite strikingly marked compared to many of our woodpeckers. You'll see that it has this beautiful brownish head. Like many woodpeckers, there is red on the head, but unlike the red-bellied that we saw before, the red in northern flicker is confined to a small triangle on the back of the head. It has this beautiful brownish face, a very distinguished V-shaped dark crescent on the upper breast, and these striking, bold black spots on the breast and flanks, which grade into black crescents on the back of the bird. This happens to be a male, which you can identify by the fact that it has this dark malar stripe underneath the chin. If this were a female, she would look similar, but the face would be plain without this dark mark. What makes flickers special is that they've adapted to a way of life that no other woodpecker, at least in this region, shares, and that is, instead of feeding almost extensively in trees, these birds feed almost entirely on the ground. They have discovered a rich food source in ants and beetles, and they've learned to exploit that. So whilst you will see flickers nesting in trees and spending time in trees, you will more often than not actually encounter them on the ground, in the grass, on your lawn, along a trail such as the ones here at Wentworth, looking for and feeding upon ants and beetles. Flicker is technically a year-round resident in this area, although we absolutely have a lot fewer flickers in the winter. So this bird does move north and south with the seasons. Flicker is not a particular bird of concern. They're doing quite well. They're adapted to a wide range of habitats. So let's have a listen to the song of the northern flicker.
The next group we'll talk about is the family of wood warblers. Here in the northeastern United States, we have many, many wood warblers that come through. Warblers are all migratory birds. There are a few warblers that might hang on through the winter here in Massachusetts, but typically it's out on the coast. Almost all warblers are going to spend their winters down in Central or South America, and they will make a massive journey, typically directly over the Gulf of Mexico, in order to hit the eastern flyway of the United States and come north. Warblers are small birds. They're very, very active, and all of them have these small, very, very sharp bills. This is called a yellow warbler, which is aptly named because this bird is almost entirely yellow. If you get a good look at it, you'll also notice some red streaking on the breast of many yellow warblers. And in fact, there have been some studies that indicate the more red streaking a male has, the larger his territory and the greater his success in actually fostering young. The yellow warbler is a bird of the edges. I tend to associate them with wetter, moister habitats, but that's not necessarily true. You can find them in dry upland habitats as well. What they require is kind of a brushy edge, like you see here at Wentworth Farm. Yellow warblers are one of those birds that you will hear singing as you walk around Wentworth Farm this time of year. All warblers are almost entirely insectivores. They use that sharp bill to pick insects off of foliage. And this time of year, when warblers are just beginning to migrate through, you'll often see them high up in the trees, among the little leaf clusters, among the tree flowers, picking out small caterpillars and insects that are also starting to emerge this time of year. Yellow warbler is a very, very early migrant in both senses. It tends to be one of the first warblers to show up in Massachusetts, and it's one of the first to head back. They typically just raise one brood, which is unusual for songbirds, and then by July, the yellow warblers will be winging their way back to their wintering grounds. Yellow warbler has a very distinctive song, and it's one that you can typically learn fairly easily. It has generally 3 notes, sweet, 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 and then a bit of a chatter. And that's the yellow warbler.
Still here in this shrubby habitat at Wentworth Farm, and in this type of habitat, if you were here in May, you might find this bird. This is the grey catbird. It's a species that belongs to the family Mimidae. That family also includes the northern mockingbird, also a bird of this area, and the family also includes various species of thrashers, including the brown thrasher, which can also be found in this region. Mimidae get their name from their habit of mimicking other birds, which they do to varying degrees. It is not true to say that they have no songs of their own. Their songs are extremely individual and extremely identifiable to species, but it is true that all the mimids will, to some degree or another, use fragments of other bird song in their own song. What makes this a grey catbird? What you'll notice immediately is that this one is aptly named. It is grey, predominantly grey, but there are 2 exceptions to that pattern. The first is this dark cap, which is black and very conspicuous on most birds. And the other identifying feature, if the bird happens to lift its tail, flip its tail up, or fly away from you, you might catch a glimpse of these startling, shocking red undertail coverts. Rarely visible in the bird in its normal posture, but if you see it, that very definitively makes it a grey catbird. These birds like shrubby areas, edges of fields. They are also very adaptable to man-made landscapes, so if you have shrubby, less well-kept parts of your yard, you may have catbirds in residence. They are supreme generalists. Their diet contains almost anything you can think of. Early in the season, when they are actively raising young, these birds tend to focus on insects because that's where they can get the most bang for the buck in terms of calories and protein. But as the season wears on, the young are grown and gone, and the insects are going dormant or dying off, these birds, like American robins, will switch to a more plant-based diet, including berries and fruit. Grey catbird is quite migratory. We do not have more than a handful of grey catbirds in the region during the winter. Most of them do move south, but they don't move very far south. This bird has an interesting wintering ground that includes the coastal North America, from maybe a few hundred miles south of here all the way down the Atlantic coast, Florida, and around the Gulf Coast. This bird is not of particular conservation significance at the moment. They are very adaptable and they do very well in man-made landscapes. Let's have a listen. We're going to actually listen to 2 vocalizations of grey catbird. Their song, which gives them the name of mimic, is a chaotic jumble of notes which will include hardly recognizable fragments of other songs. Let's have a listen to the song of grey catbird. highly variable. Thank you, Mike. And Mike, if you can move to the next gray catbird song. Highly variable, and there are fragments of other songs in there, but they're rather hard to discern. With any luck, we might have no, which gives it its name, catbird. And that is basically a meowing sound. It sounds like a cat meowing. I won't try to imitate it, but that is the second vocalization of gray catbird.
That is another warbler. Again, you can tell it's a warbler. You can't see that it's necessarily got a small size, but it does have this sharp pointed bill designed for picking insects off foliage. This is a common yellowthroat. It's a very, very common warbler in Massachusetts. The predominant feature that you'll tend to notice, especially on a bold male, is this black mask that they have that goes through the eye and the bright yellow throat. Those are the hallmarks of the common yellowthroat. The females are a little bit less bold, a little bit more difficult to tell. This bird also has a unique posture. It looks a little bit pot-bellied compared to many warblers, and it often raises its tail a little bit, so it almost looks a little bit like a wren, if you know what a house wren is. Common yellowthroat is another bird of the brushy edge, and they probably have a stronger affinity for water than the other two species we've talked about here. Again, this is a migratory bird. It's largely insectivorous, although it can also eat seeds and berries, which is rather unusual for a warbler. None of these birds are of particular conservation concern right now, and that's because they all tend to be generalists. They tend to tolerate humans very, very well. You can find common yellowthroats on the edge of a brushy garden or in rose bushes. These birds will exist almost anywhere that humans have created some sort of an edge or some sort of a brushy habitat. They have a very, very easily learned song. If you're walking along water and you hear a witchery, 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 it's probably a common yellowthroat. Love them or hate them, you can't lead even a virtual bird walk without talking about sparrows. Right now, we're still at the Wentworth Farm Conservation Area and we're in a brushy field, but we could have chosen almost any habitat at all for this particular species. As I mentioned, it's a sparrow. Sparrows in the United States tend to be very, very brown. And you can see, particularly in this picture, this bird is very brown. The other key feature to note is the bill. It's got a conical bill, and all sparrows have this conical bill, and it's designed particularly for crushing and eating seeds. The song sparrow, which is this particular specimen, is probably the most common sparrow year-round in this part of Massachusetts. Other sparrows will migrate a little bit. Right now, juncos have left the area, white-throated sparrows have left the area, song sparrows are remaining, and other sparrows are coming in to join them. This bird is a supreme generalist, though. Not only will it eat seeds, it will also eat insects, it will eat other small invertebrates, it will come to your feeders. It's highly adaptable as far as where it likes to be. You can find them in your backyard, and you can find them on the edge of relatively desolate tracts of woodland, or in marshes, or in a variety of places. Unlike a lot of sparrows, the song sparrow is a relatively solitary bird. They don't seem to form huge flocks with other song sparrows, except in the winter. How do I know this is a song sparrow? I know this is a song sparrow because it's got heavy streaking on its sides. David, for a previous bird, mentioned the malar stripe. Songbird has a very, very prominent malar stripe, very, very dark. And frequently, the streaks on the side coalesce into a central breast spot, although that's not always present. The other main way to identify song sparrows is by their song. Their song can be extraordinarily variable, just as can be the plumage for this bird. Songbirds are not particularly a species of concern because they are so good at adapting to any kind of conditions. The song of the song sparrow is typically 3 or 4 chips, followed by a trill, followed by a jumble of other noises. David, the song sparrow. If you can learn to identify a song sparrow song, then you've got a long way toward getting a foothold on the sparrows of the United States. Thanks.
Okay, so for the last bird in our Living with the Land presentation, we've chosen to go with the emblem of the Kestrel Land Trust, the American kestrel. It is one of 3 falcon species that we can reasonably expect to find in New England. The other 2 being peregrine falcon and merlin, both of which are very powerful, dominant hunters in our landscape. American kestrel is a falcon for the following reasons. This bird has very long, back-swept and sharp wings built for high-speed flight and maneuverability. You can see by the bill, which is dainty and small in this bird, but it's nonetheless a bird of prey bill. Many birds of prey have yellow nares, which are these areas of open skin around the nostrils, and this bird's no exception. It has yellow skin around the nostril and also at the corner of the eye. All birds of prey are equipped with extremely powerful feet and long claws for grabbing and holding prey. Unlike its more dominating cousins, the peregrine and the merlin, kestrel has made a living on simpler fare. It is built for catching much smaller animals. The largest animals it will take include small mammals like voles and mice, and it makes a habit also of consuming a lot of insects, especially grasshoppers. Kestrel is a bird of very extreme conservation concern in the Northeast. Nationwide, it's officially regarded as of low concern, but that is because it does very well in the large, wide open grasslands of the Central American prairies. Here in the Northeast, this bird is facing critical habitat shortage because grasslands have declined in size. Again, as we spoke about with field sparrow, our habitats have tended to graduate towards 2 extremes. One are deep forests with complete tree cover, and the other is human landscapes, houses, developments, etc. This bird requires large amounts of wide open grassland. There have been efforts here at Wentworth Farm to attract breeding kestrels. Behind me is a kestrel nest box. You can usually tell when it's a kestrel nest box by the fact that it's on a very tall pole, and as you can see, it's quite large with a large hole. We have actually seen American kestrel in this area this morning.